Hello guys, Arcand here. Welcome to another toe dip. This is Sparks, A Tale of Ink. This visual novel was developed by Chris. He's the creator and writer. Sprites by Neku, CG by Kusen, BG by Kemi, supporting artist and UI by Jasper, music by Kurenai and Poke, and programming by Dylan. In this VN, there is something called a sovereign that ascended the world's throne as a new god, and then strange powers awoke in everyone inhabiting the planet. The main character is Zhangken, and he is a student interested in this history, and he aims to explore this. So let's check out the story. Prologue. Thus ruled the sovereign. Final chapter. Thus he held the final divine remnant in his hands, the still beating heart of a dead god. As the king felt it merge with his own body, memories flooded back into his mind. Times of happiness with the man he loved more than anything in the world. Times of war and conflict that the two of them could overcome together. Times of loss as he held the lifeless body of his beloved in his hands on that fateful night. Times of change as the messenger from the stars began to talk to him, giving the king advice on where to go and what to prepare for. Times of disaster as the owner of the heart he now held was attacked by a fell creature. And lastly, the decisions he made to save those who would still hang on to hope. The remnants of power still crackled through his veins after a hidden potential awoke to him at the border of despair and hope. He had lit the very first spark. The spark of hope. And now he would have to clear the dark clouds of calamity that were covering Asik's skies with the might of a god and his newfound ability at his side. With all his hope for the future, he only wished that his lover was still looking onto him. As he ascended the world's throne as the sovereign, changing Cirque forever. This reads like a religious children's bedtime tale. Chapter 1. What we want, what we need. As Zhangken closed the book, he let out a soft groan and dropped the volume on the floor next to his bed, a small dust cloud rising up in response. 3, 4, 8, 10. 10 more pages that are just praise to the sovereign. Again. How dare anyone call this facts in their right mind? The lack of any information regarding agriculture, cuisine, battle techniques, anything. Best, this was a bad attempt at historic romance. No wait, unless... where are the sources? He proceeded to shoot up to his feet and immediately felt his back hurt. Regret for the sudden movement coursed through his being. How long had he been curled up in this horrible reading position now? He couldn't recall. While doing some stretches to relieve the pain, his gaze wandered through his dorm room. The wooden floor was holding up well, despite the dust that it had been collecting for who knows how long, in addition to being assaulted with books on the regular. The smell of burned wax and smoke lingered everywhere, especially in the fabrics of his bed, his clothes, and fur. It was hard to get rid of those when he couldn't open the window during the rainy seasons, lest he desired water damage on the books. The mere thought of it made his fur bristle. He gave a quick glance to his desk. He could check what he had written down during previous reading sessions, but on second thought, Zhangken sat down once again with a heavy sigh. In his head, he started to recount what the book that he had just read stated, and realized that the focus was overtly on the relationship between the king and his second-in-command. How come I never noticed the many moments those two spent together in the lush fields, the noisy taverns, the cozy fireplaces? I should begin to inquire better on these works with others in the future. Drained of energy, he opened the book to check when it was written. The foreword didn't even include a date of publishing. Horrible non-standard, and the rescribes didn't even fix it? How hard could it be to plaster a date somewhere? He kept mumbling to himself as he found afterward, once he got past many more pages that told of the sovereign's many deeds. Deeds Zhangken couldn't care less for. The student finally found the author's name, Salem Swiftquill. His title implied that this man had penned even more books, a thought that made Zhangken shiver. A page after credited the rescribes that were responsible for the book. They probably put more effort into publishing copies of this piece of ash than the author did when in writing it. The next few pages included more unnecessary credits that Zhangken skipped over until he finally found a number. 1996? Really? That's atrocious, even for a delusional piece of fiction. What's this here then? We attribute this work to the learnings of ascension that he taught us. No, no, no! Full of spite, he tossed the book into the air. Of course, written by some religious zealots. Of course this wouldn't lead him anywhere new. Only once again back to the start. Already at the brink of yelling out a curse he learned from his grandmother, Zhangken wanted to catch the volume again so as not to suffer a concussion, until he realized that a small piece of paper was fluttering down next to it. Immediately, he thought that it had been his fault, that he tore away a corner of the page, and went through the scenarios in his head of what would happen if he returned the book in this state. A second cataclysm to tear sky and sea asunder, ash and molten stone raining down on his head. Perhaps he could ask Gail to fix it for him, but then he hadn't returned any of the favors that they did for him yet at all. Before more scenarios could go through his head, the book already landed back on his head and the torn piece of paper on his knees. To his relief, he noticed that the page didn't belong to the book at all. The material and handwriting were completely different from the rest of the dreadful tome. Strangely enough, it didn't line up with any writing he had seen before. The book he just finished was from the Flatlands and had a curvy style, but what he saw here was very different. An elegant form with strict lines and no smudges at all. A truly professional calligrapher must have written it. Slightly awestruck, Zhangken actually took to read what was written on the paper, only to be disappointed by it being some nonsense, with a single cryptic sentence next to it. Ascension's truth, right at the et, his NM4, page 38. He turned the piece around to be greeted by a cut-off sentence that reached the end of the page. Mekan waif enaid adat id drake. I don't know if I read that well. The verdant tongue. He easily recognized it, as it was one of the many languages that were no longer spoken after the sovereign's ascension. They were found in books written by the last king himself, though. Yet the strange note intrigued him far more. Ascension's truth? Right at what? And who did this NM belong to? Curiosity immediately crept up on him. Someone who must be doing similar research to him then hid a note in this book. No one else would look at it, other than those desperate for knowledge, such as himself. Immediately, the euphoria of discovery turned into a sense of dread. Sure, he had found something of import, but what would he do with it? He had no clue as to how to decipher the code, nor could he read the text to assign it to any textbook. The potential truth of the world was at his fingertips, and he couldn't even solve the hint that he had received. Zhangken felt just as pathetic as he had at home. He fell back and kept looking at the piece of paper, taking in the rain that was falling against the window. Truth of why the world was forced to exist like this. Perhaps the records were just that. Truth. But why then had there never been more to it? You will never find the truth if you aren't even looking for it. One of the many platitudes Calum came up with to motivate him in the face of roadblocks that he couldn't overcome himself. Calum. Perhaps... Zhangken shot up and grabbed into the brown leather bag that was sitting next to his bed. He sifted through a book bound in brown leather, stopping at a very specific page. There he found the timetable of Calum's lectures for the month. He was in lecture now, but Zhangken could probably ask him about it afterwards. Zhangken himself might be at a loss, but his professor had always been encouraged to ask for help. So what kept him from it? He grabbed his bag and slung it over his shoulder, then proceeded to look at his own calendar. These were located in every dorm room. While the pages were slightly yellowed with age, it was in good condition still. No need to change what isn't broken. He made sure that he was on the right day, and in shock realized that the month of downpour was ending in just 2 days. It was easy to lose track of time, but the calendars were installed in such a way that a ray of light would be focused through the windows onto the current day. People worked hard on that technique for years. Whoever set them up must live a life of luxury now. He discarded the thought and took in a sharp breath, leading him to cough immediately from the dust he had swirled up. With confidence in his mind, Zhangken snapped the thumb and middle finger on his right hand, making the fire of his fireplace and candle disappear. A familiar warmth filled Zhangken's chest for a moment, and after taking a deep breath, he opened the door and left his room. The first lecture hall was easily located. Caleb was, luckily, always assigned to the same one. At some point, he said that it was simply a location he preferred, even though all the lecture halls were supposed to look the same. He opened the door to the hall with a horrible antler knob and started looking for a vacant seat. Between the mixed figures of listeners, he could also spot some people from his own inauguration. After all, there was no rigid timetable to adhere to. He let himself fall onto a chair next to a pair of students who were squinting their eyes, looking at the illegible writing that the raccoon plastered onto the board and back at their own books. Zhangken chuckled with confidence and inched closer to the two of them. His experience with the rather eccentric history professor had been similar. Zhangken reached for one of his own notebooks with precision and put it down so the other two, who started focusing on him instead of the lecture, could take a peek into the notes. He's explaining Sodites again, isn't he? It wasn't even a question. It is said that the world had fallen into patterns at the behest of the sovereign, but people are doing so as well. They are just harder to spot. Every now and then, Killam had to talk about how he had revolutionized the water systems of the bigger cities, thanks to his discovery of notes on the so-called Sodites. One of them, a panther dressed in light robes, stared back at him. Aye, and me and my mate here can't follow a single word he is saying. We both know our ins and outs of basic sparks and such. But what in the name of the depths is he talking about? What exactly do you mean? He likes to talk a lot when the day is long. Steel construct systems lie down a redundant feedback loop of ink-based circuits that either lead to a positive feedback loop or on exposure of a muted negative feedback with a suppressed loop if transparent absorbent casing is used. What in the name of the sea does he mean? He means... well, he's just taking words he read and uses them to appear smarter. What now? The words. He doesn't know what they mean either. He just wants to appear smart. He just what? What kind of history professor just makes things up? Believe it or not, the best one out there. He has helmed every single expedition to Old World ruins so far, organizing and executing them. Is that why he's wearing those garish Old World clothes? Yes, he apparently found the patterns for them on his very first foray and has been wearing them ever since. People never see him without the coat. So he just wants to make things seem more interesting then. Doesn't help me understand anything he said about them damn stones though. I only know they remember sparks or something. Exactly, and you can build complex systems around them. Like what? I certainly could explain them, but I feel like what would be much more favorable is a practical demonstration. You've been listening in, haven't you? The question wasn't directed at the other student, but rather somewhere else, as Zhangken raised his voice. The broad-shouldered professor downstairs only nodded, looking up to the two, who also began drawing the gaze of the other listeners. Zhangken stood up and reached out, as Caleb threw a small black gemstone at him. Smooth to the touch, he almost dropped it but managed to grasp it properly. The surface was non-reflective and he could feel something wrapped around the stone, akin to a thread. With turning it a little, he could see that the thread connected down to the end of the lecture hall, where Caleb was holding a different sodite. What's that now? Your cue, I'd say. Do you have any ink? What kind of question is that? Of course I do. The panther grasped a ring, similar to the one that Zhangken wore, and took it off. It was made from transparent glass-like material and filled almost to the brim with a white substance. Are you ready down there? I'm always ready. Can we start? Sure can. Stone in hand, Caleb went to the window with it. He opened a small compartment with trained expertise, then held it outside into the rain. Well, what now? Now you put some ink on the stone, easy as that. Said and done, the panther pulled on a small latch on the ring's side, letting a droplet of ink escape from its confines. For a moment, things went well, until the water began pouring out of every inch of the stone. In disgust, Zhangken dropped the sodite and accidentally rammed his hand into the panther's side, who still had the compartment of his ring opened. The sudden movement made more droplets of the substance spray around. They landed on Zhangken's hand and the panther's cheek. Pain spread through his hand immediately and he screamed out loud. "Oh, Flames, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything. You hit me." The panther was holding his cheek where the ink landed, likely feeling the same pain as Zhangken. "How do I make it stop hurting?" "Just wait a bit. It's been..." He inhaled sharply. "Just a droplet. The sensation should be gone in a moment." "What happened?" "Didn't you know that you're not supposed to touch ink? It's the first thing young sparkers learn." Water had begun to pool on the floor from the sodite he dropped before. Coordinating his legs was hard as he still felt the sharp pain course through his hand. All the while, Calem's booming laugh got louder by the moment. The pain had finally started to fade as Calem picked up the stone that had stopped emitting water and threw it out of the window compartment he opened earlier. He cast it out with precision, despite the angle being extremely sharp. Then he placed his own sodite down on the wet floor and poured a drop of ink from a small glass onto it as well. In the blink of an eye, the water was gone. "Thank you, Professor." "No problem, boy. I like helping out those that bite off more than they can chew. And let me tell you, dear Zhangken here always picks the biggest meals from the pile." His laugh filled the hall once again. He then checked on the two students to make sure they were fine. Other than his wet paw, Zhangken felt fine and grumbled a thank you in his direction. "If you have been observing," he turned to the entire class now, "this is what a positive feedback loop on the basis of the initiator looks like. The sodite I used absorbed water, and the signal was led to the other sodite that would then redistribute it. As it was the recipient of the signal, it kept going as long as there was input, and that is how the water system in this academy works. Note that down, please. It will be relevant for the test. Now, everyone can go. Except for Zhangken. I assume there's a reason why you came to attend a lecture for a class you had already passed?" After everyone had left, student and professor looked at each other for a few moments, the silence only broken by the rain and wind outside. Then Calem burst into laughter. "You have quite the knack for this, you know." "Excuse me?" "You know, causing trouble." "Please, you know full well that I don't do it on purpose." "Yet it sounds like trouble follows your every tiny little step, but that aside. What is so urgent that you needed to sit through a lecture? Well, half of a lecture at least, just to talk with me." "Right. You see, I got desperate and looked through any kind of book that was talking about the Sovereign's ascension." "Did you find anything important? Anything new about his name? His species? His lover? The strange creature from the heavens that assisted him?" "No, nothing at all." "So a day well spent, then. I hope you enjoy a taste of what it is like to investigate old world business." No, I really don't. But that's not my point. Here, look at this." He produced a scrap of paper. "It's not made of the same paper as the book I found it in. Look, there's some notes here." "What? What is this text on the other side?" "I can't read it. It's in the verdant tongue." "Zhangken, it refers to dragons in some way." "To dragons?" "Yes, here, drag means dragon. We found the word next to a drawing of what we concluded as being one. This might be a huge discovery, as we barely have any references to the creatures themselves." "What about the rest of the text? Can you read that as well?" "Admittedly, no, not without reference material. Let me copy the text so I can look up what this might mean. Are your studies of the verdant tongue going anywhere?" "I figured I might try learning more of it when I have further access to material from the old world." "Right. I would grant you permission, but the whole Historian Association has to oversee your progress and give a majority vote and all that. Which makes the fact that one book written in an old world language has been damaged even more concerning." "I was hoping you might know where this belongs to." "As I said, I don't. What about the other side? The numbers, the NM? Ascension's truth? Huh? Oh, that's not hard to solve. I think I figured it out already. A feeling of glee overcame Zhangken upon hearing this. Finally, progress? So what is the solution then? I figured you'd best find that out yourself, lad. As his emotions had soared, they came crashing down immediately. It felt as if a hammer struck him and knocked the air out of his lungs. What? Oh, you know, proactivity is the essence of discovery. Do it yourself, or you'll never do it. I am unsure where to start then. Well, perhaps you can find the person who wrote it. If they are a student or on the Academy's educational body, you know who to ask. I am not going to Gail's sparring lessons. You might just have to. It's all they have scheduled in the next few days, and they like to retreat into solitude after teaching all day. Oh, Ashes, I don't want to hear anything about combat. I don't care. Come on, Zhangken. Without sacrifice. Discovery is out of reach. Fine, I'll do it. But you know full well that I won't enjoy it. Lightspeed, lad. Let's meet for lunch again tomorrow in case any of us make discoveries to any degree. Yes? Sounds good to me. With a heavy sigh, Zhangken left the auditorium. Though progress seemed to be imminent, the sacrifice he had to make for it felt as if it favored him less than any other risk that could have been taken. Scenarios of what would come next were already playing on repeat in his head, like a painter that drew over his own pictures, showcasing only one. He hated it more than touching the water from before. Zhangken could have stood before the door to the auditorium for a few more moments, pondering the very steps that led him returning here. He pushed away memories of his first, and to date, last lesson in this very room. Alas, he had to go in there again if he wanted to further his own goals, even if it came at the cost of his nerves. He forcefully grabbed the doorknob and felt the antlers dig into his paw. He eased off immediately. Whose idea were these horrible things anyways? Cautiously, he poked his head through the opening to assess the situation. Immediately, the familiar professor's voice toned up to his ears. At least he didn't go to the wrong hall by mistake this time. The rows were filled by a huge number of young students, new arrivals who were present at the introduction ceremony just a few days ago. Though the academy didn't force any uniforms onto students or professors, many showed up wearing light clothing. Different colors and fabrics indicated the diverse origins of students at the academy, but the similar cuts of clothes they wore betrayed the picture of a diverse world. They were free to come and study whatever subjects they preferred under a single condition. Everyone that wanted to attend the academy for free had to discover and demonstrate their spark. The lecturing hall had a hanging smell of writing ink and mixed musks of the students, combined with hints of different soaps. The scribble of quills on paper fought a losing battle against the wind, rain, and lightning raging outside. A harmony that would comfort him. Yet it was the subject being taught that filled him instead with dread. In trying to look for a free seat, he stared down to the bottom of the lecture hall, where the familiar white-furred fox kept talking about the history of combat and its current-day applications. This nonsense again. Zhangken mumbled as he took a seat as far removed from anyone else as possible. Yet he drew a few eyes of attention and smirked. Could he possibly persuade them against learning the arts of combat? Wars were a thing of the old world after all. Unless you were fighting the dreaded dull beasts. You there, girl with the thick arms, what do you hope to gain from learning how to wield a sword? The girl didn't want to draw her eyes away from the professor at the front and tried to answer as subtly as possible. I want to join the Sovereign's army and eradicate the dull beasts. Her voice was louder than expected, and Zhangken flinched in response. Her partner killed the beast and we had to relocate to the capital. Then you could just fight them with your spark, no? What's yours? I can reshape flames. See? That is already such a useful ability to use on the battlefield. Why go out of your way and learn how to wield a weapon of steel? Because... Both the girl and Zhangken flinched as they heard the professor speak up and turn around. Their uneven gaze fixed to the two of them. A weapon is not a finite resource. But on the battlefield, one quickly finds himself out of ink. Thus the fool who does not bring a weapon for protection falls to their own arrogance. The girl, and everyone else in the lecturing hall as well, wrote down what Gail said straight away, while Zhangken sighed in frustration. Now to you, Zhangken. Your comments make it clear you have no intention of learning today. Is your only purpose to disrupt? I actually came to ask a question. During my lesson? Why? Is it combat related? Well, no. Then perhaps it would have been a better choice to wait until after and not complain about me talking about the current subject. Well, I intended to wait, but... Your irrational hatred of weapon-based combat had you talking again? To my students? During my lesson? I just don't think it is at all that useful. I see. Would you join me at the front, then? I am not particularly fond of... That was not a request. Come here. Now. Zhangken contemplated his situation and slowly made his way to the front where his friend waited. He could have simply turned around to exit, but that would have left Zhangken standing on an even looser foot with them than before. With a heavy heart and a sense of dread building his chest, he chose to stand right in front of Gail, only barely matching their height. As always, their mismatched eyes didn't betray a single thought that was going on in Gail's head. Though if Zhangken had to guess, what would come next was to be a mix between education and humiliation. At least you seem to understand your situation. Splendid. Dear students, this is Zhangken, one of the oldest students gracing our halls these days, not because he has been here for very long, but rather due to his late decision to join us here. Hey, I decided not by my own accord that my spark awakened so late. You could have always joined us the other way. Whatever, I am not having this discussion now, not in front of everyone. What is it that you want then? I could ask you the same thing. What is it that you promised yourself to get for barging into my lesson? Found a clue while doing research and needed your help. Yet another delusional request regarding your strange quest to prove me wrong in believing that the Sovereign is a true god of the New World, I assume. Perhaps today I shall humor you, if you would be so kind as to assist with a demonstration of stances and their import in battle. He would have declined on the spot, if it weren't for the fact that he really needed Gail's assistance in the matter. So he stood upright and nodded, despite the impending ridicule that he could already feel on the tip of his tongue. I do have to admit, though, I didn't bring any of my countless training swords that decorate my room, so I have to say... Then I shall supply you one. I would not be teaching combat if I were not ready to grant arms at any given time, my good friend. Ashes. He cursed under his breath. Gail swiftly procured an additional sword from a rack located near the podium, and then drew the one they were carrying along. Carefully, they laid both of them onto the podium itself and touched each of them. Sharp. A single word, resounding with power, echoed through the entire lecture hall. A clear shiver could be felt by everyone witnessing Gail's powerful spark at work as they lifted their fingers from the swords. The action had no indicator that it happened. Usually a spark drew with it a visual or audible indicator. The power simply became true. It was not like the swords lost their sharpened edge. Rather, it was as if the swords had always been blunt. As with every time that Gail used their spark, a slight feeling of unease crept over Zhangken, and he could tell from looking at those sitting in the seats. He could see them shivering, confused, or nauseous. Zhangken could be assured they all felt unease after Gail altered the sword's state. A terrifying power, used for such a normal act, there was a reason why Gail had been chosen to become an inheritor of the Twistwood title.